Hi, my name is Hari Parekh and I'm the Volunteers Manager for Faithless. Faithless was set up in 2015 to do two things. The first is to raise awareness of the difficulties of leaving high control religions within the UK. And secondly, the aim is to support those that have left religions and cults within the UK too, especially with the issues of control. Faithless aims to raise awareness of the plights of apostates by doing a number of things. We've held public lectures, talks, panel discussions, events, presentations, social kind of outreach events with organisations. We regularly talk at universities and are invited, and we hold online conversations like this as well. Our team of volunteers aims to raise further awareness of apostates and the plight of apostates through things like apostate socials, where people gather together at a weekend for a couple of hours. We hold safeguarding training to kind of highlight to organisations and professionals of the plight of apostates as well. And thirdly, we hold peer support sessions across the UK to support as many people as we can. If you want any more if you would like further information, please don't hesitate to have a look at our website, www.faithless.com. Today, I'll be joined by Professor Chris French from Goldsmiths University in relation to superstitions involved with COVID-19 at the moment. So, hello, thank you very much for listening to us today. My name is Hari Parekh. I'm the Volunteers Manager for Faithless. Today, we have the wonderful Professor Chris French, who leads the Anomalistic is an animal thing. Anomalistic Psychological Research Division at the Goldsmiths University. So welcome to Chris today.
Thank you.
And today what I wanted to talk to Chris about was the current circumstances regarding COVID-19 and the role that conspiracy theories, superstition, and those areas kind of impact on the way that the general public and everybody around us, even worldwide, how that's affected us, how that's kind of seeped into public consensus or even into government in the UK, you could probably add in, without insinuating anything. So without further ado, so Chris, talk to us a little bit about how this meets your research needs or research area and how it might travel over.
Sure. I mean, anomalistic psychology, as the name suggests, is the kind of psychology of anomalies or kind of, for me, basically, putting it very simply, it's the psychology of weird shit. Okay, so anything from kind of paranormal experiences to beliefs in unfounded conspiracies, the kind of weird stuff. I'm interested in the whole psychology of where that's coming from. And I should say that although I used to believe in a lot of this stuff myself, the more psychology I learned, the more of a skeptic I became, the more I appreciated the ways in which our own minds can fool us. I mean, this goes across the board. It applies to everybody. And trying to understand those kind of weird beliefs and weird experiences that people have in terms of psychological factors is really what anomalistic psychology is all about. Now, so that means that, as I say, I've had a long-standing interest in the kind of psychology of ostensibly paranormal experiences and so on and so forth, but it's kind of widened beyond that. So that of recent years, belief in conspiracy theories has become kind of one of our major focuses, and of course the whole kind of coronavirus pandemic has really kind of spawned many different conspiracy theories. And it's a really nice test case, if you like, to look at the kind of conditions that lead to what I would think of as magical thinking. And kind of for me, magical thinking covers a whole range of different areas. That would include paranormal beliefs. It would include kind of traditional superstitions, complementary and alternative medicine, but also religion and belief in unfounded conspiracy theories. And what's common to all of those areas is that it's at times of great uncertainty, when we feel that things are out of our control, that kind of thinking tends to really increase and become more prevalent. And I think we're seeing that at the moment, definitely, in terms of the ideas that misinformation, the conspiracy theories, the unfounded claims about various cures and measures that people can take to protect themselves or to cure coronavirus. All that, really highlights all of that kind of aspect.
And how do you think that's entwined with things like public opinion and the way that the governments are working at the moment, or how it's interacted in that way? Do you think it's played a role?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting to compare and contrast the way that some of the governments around the world have handled the crisis, or tried to. I mean, yeah, basically some of them have been more effective, I would say, than others. And in terms of the governments that have been not very effective, yeah, I mean, I suppose the prime example is, of course, Donald Trump. I mean, he's a huge believer in conspiracy theories. He kind of just throws out this kind of stuff. He's not really bothered about half the time. He doesn't really bother whether what he's saying is true or false. But those kind of ideas can actually be very dangerous. People feel very, very uncertain, unsure about the future. That's perfectly understandable. Kind of people are anxious generally about what's going to happen. And one of the big factors that relates to belief in conspiracy theories is the idea that in a kind of ironic, strange way, we tend to prefer the idea that at least there is something in control. This stuff isn't just coming out of the blue unpredictably. Now, the coronavirus was really something that, nobody kind of could have predicted that specific pandemic. We knew some kind of pandemic was going to happen, and we should have planned for it. Didn't. But something in life, sometimes stuff just comes out of the blue, totally beyond any individual's control, and then we have to try and cope with it. And there are various kind of cognitive biases that we have that I think are relevant when it comes to coronavirus. For example, there's something called the proportionality bias. We're not very comfortable with the idea that something kind of very, very small, a small cause can have a big effect. Yeah. And so, we assume there must be something more behind it. There must be a conspiracy. There must be. So if you look at the kind of ideas that have been around, I mean, another bias that we have is something called the intentionality bias, or sometimes called agenticity, that when something happens out in the world, someone or something made it happen for a particular reason. There was some kind of planning behind it. And so, of course, when coronavirus hit, well, who's caused that and for what reason? And then you get all these kind of wild speculations about it being some kind of bioweapon, about there being some possible link with 5G. I mean, that's been a hugely popular conspiracy theory, and it's led to people kind of attacking phone masts and threatening workers who are involved in installing 5G. And again, another relevant bias I think here is the fact that we often read meaning and significance into kind of random, coincidental things. So the fact that both kind of 5G is linked in people's minds to China because of the kind of Huawei stuff, and the virus seemed to originate in China. People put two and two together and make five, and I mean, one of the other interesting things for me is the fact that there isn't just one kind of 5G coronavirus conspiracy. There are several that all contradict each other. There are those people who say that coronavirus is a hoax, there is no virus, this is all a cover to make us stay indoors so that they can install 5G and then they can control us. You get others that say 5G in some way causes coronavirus or affects our immune system to make us more susceptible to the effects of coronavirus. And other variations on that. There isn't just one theory, but the overriding factor is that we are being lied to. The official story is untrue. Now, well, unfortunately, we've got a situation where the Chinese government were slow in kind of telling the rest of the world what was happening, and so that kind of feeds into the conspiracy theory mentality. And then we've got a situation where our own government is spinning the figures left, right, and centre rather than just being totally transparent we can all accept this is a really difficult situation and the errors will be made, and that to some extent we've got to kind of plan as we go along.
Yeah.
But this kind of notion that they're putting out, and Trump is even worse for it, how amazingly well they've handled the situation when there are hundreds of thousands of people dying. It's actually
or the apparent was it Johnson's line, which was the apparent success of the UK government.
Yeah,
Currently, it's just like the apparent, talk to the people that have lost loved ones as a result of the apparent success.
I mean, it's awful. Yeah.
When we look at this psychologically speaking, so when we put the lens of psychology onto this, and we look at the notion of control, we look at the notion of people's kind of people's locus of control here is playing somewhat of a factor. What do you think can be said about that? But what do you think can be done about that? Because at the moment, everybody's perhaps feeling very powerless or out of control. And the notion of that is something that people probably in these generations haven't felt in this way before either. So what do you think of that as a psychology perspective on that?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think that the whole kind of locus of control factor is hugely important. In case any of the kind of listeners aren't aware of what that is, the idea is that we're all on a spectrum in terms of how we think about things that happen in our lives being the way they are, and events that happen. And so some people have an internal locus of control. If you score highly on that, then on internality, then you're the kind of person who believes that your life is the way it is because of your decisions, your actions, and so on. At the other extreme are people who have a high external locus of control. And those are the kind of people who believe that things happen to them. To some extent, that they're kind of victims of events and circumstances, and there's nothing they could have done about it. And, most people are kind of somewhere in between, but we all have a kind of preferred predisposition. And of course, life is somewhere in between. Many of the things that happen in your life are down to your decisions and your actions, but equally others can come out of the blue and just knock you off course or whatever. Sure. As you'd expect, people who believe in conspiracy theories tend to have a high external locus of control because they believe there are forces out there that can kind of impinge on your life, and they're very powerful forces. There's nothing much you can do about it. Psychologically, it's generally healthier to be at the internal locus of control end of things. But of course, that is kind of quite difficult to kind of basically take kind of responsibility when we do live in a world where some things are out of our control, other things are not. It doesn't help, as I say, when people feel that they don't know what to believe. There's a lack of transparency coming from the top, from the governments, from the people who are supposed to be in control. And, there are, for me, the kind of steps that I've personally taken would be that by and large, I've certainly socially isolated. I've kept my trips out to a minimum, so you feel you've got some kind of control over what's happening. But for other people, that wasn't enough, and besides which, they don't trust the government advice anyway. So they may well turn to kind of alternatives. If you actually have more faith in Donald Trump than, say, the real health experts, the scientists, the doctors, then you may end up doing some of the daft things that he seems to be doing, or taking his hopefully people are not going around injecting themselves with bleach, but people are following other parts of his advice. Yeah.
And then you go somewhere further, where I read recently, where you've got kind of you've got Hindus drinking cow urine, they're bathing in cow dung, and you look on the other side of the spectrum and you're just like, okay, so it's not a Eurocentric or westernized issue here. This is fully fledged across the board at the moment.
I mean, there's almost no. A lot of those claims about all the kind of wackiest forms of therapy that you can think of. I mean, urine therapy has been around for centuries, and no doubt will probably carry on for centuries. Mm-hmm. It's kind of based on anecdotal evidence. It's people making claims that have no kind of basis in fact. Yeah. And
carry a weight, right? This is the point of this, right? They, for the few or even the many that follow that advice, you could argue, it still seems to carry as much weight or even more weight than the advice of someone like Dr. Fauci, for example.
Yeah. Yep.
And my question then is that what do we do then? Because if we're in a situation where public opinion is stretched between people going one way to another and kind of dismissing what evidently we know, then that's a problem, isn't it, for future society?
It is a huge problem. I mean, this whole kind of, again, it's well, not only just difficult, I think it's impossible to give a kind of a single blanket answer that would cover all contexts, because you do have to look at the reasons in the particular context that you're looking at. So, for example, in America, there's a strong theme, down the decades of kind of anti-intellectualism. And we've seen that to a certain extent from Michael Gove's comments in the UK of, oh, we've had enough of experts. Well, if you like,
we need it now.
Well, exactly. Who do we turn to in these times? Obviously that there'll always be the people kind of at the extreme who are particularly kind of the extreme conspiracy believers. They are beyond hope in terms of kind of converting them to not believing their unfounded conspiracies. But there are a lot of people in between who are in that grey area of thinking, well, might there be something in this idea about a link between 5G and coronavirus? Because let's face it, most people don't have great training in science, and we need for those people to kind of explain things and explain them maybe more effectively than we have, in terms that they can actually understand. And there are people out there who are working actively on this, doing research on the best way to kind of get those, if you like, debunking messages out there, putting them across in ways that people understand and the ways that people get, and taking into account the kind of psychological biases that we have. So, for example, you take something like anti-vax movement. The anti-vax movement is, again, incredibly strong around the world, and again causes real problems, because in those areas where we could have control, it reduces herd immunity, and then that disease becomes a problem again. But one of the things that we know from research is that people have much more of a problem with taking an action which they view as being potentially risky, rather than not taking an action, which in itself can be an even greater risk. But we feel if we're the one who's actually taken our child and got them vaccinated, and then there's a health issue, we feel much more directly responsible for it, rather than if we don't bother to get them vaccinated and they then catch that disease. Well, I suppose if they then do catch the disease, you then would feel guilty. But and again, the probabilities are that these things, that's still probably not going to happen. All the kind of people who have ignored the government advice about social distancing, most of them are not going to catch COVID. And so they'll feel justified in their disregard. And of course, it's all about probability.
Sorry? We see the number of people on the beach, we see the number of people.
Yeah. I mean, and it is confusing. It is difficult. And I think I'm right in saying that currently in London, there are, essentially 0 new cases. And so you think, well, actually, it probably is safe to go out, and yet obviously we're going to have a second wave kicking off, so we still need to, I'm still kind of being quite wary, and I'll want to wait and see, because the risk, the cost here in this situation, is potentially life-threatening. And so it's just not worth taking any chances. I want to see what's happening in kind of other countries where they're lifting the lockdown and kids are going back to school. And then, eventually, tentatively, we will have to start taking steps and trying to get back to some kind of normality. But I think the precautionary principle is best at the moment.
How do you think, if we use COVID-19 as a kind of pilot for how society sees scientific evidence, understands scientific evidence, hears from the scientific community and tries to figure out what's going on, how do you think the scientific community need to evolve in the way that they produce material or produce information or disperse information to the wider consensus. How do you think they need to learn from what's gone on this time round as an opportunity, do you think?
I think it is incredibly difficult because, science by its very nature is never about certainty. Whereas religions claim absolute certainty, and even to doubt is a sin. Science, that is not science. Although a lot of people who maybe have never really looked at it very closely think that science is all about an established body of facts, of knowledge. That's not it. The real scientists know that. And so particularly when you've got a situation like this, where there are a lot of unknowns, and we are kind of to some extent kind of learning as we go along.
Yeah.
You have to have a tolerance of ambiguity that most people do not want to associate with scientists. So, we want our scientists to say, this is what you should do, and this is the cure for that, and so on. And that's just unfortunately not the way it works. You look at even the kind of big picture history of science, and everybody thought Newton was right, and he'd explained pretty much everything in the damn universe, and then along comes this upstart Einstein and says, oh no, this is the way things really are. Scientists can't make their mind up, they don't know anything. Of course, that's a strength of science, that it revises in the light of new evidence. But I mean, the government at the moment, the UK government, consistently saying kind of, we're following the science, we're following the science. And recently there have been signs that this is actually going to translate into, we're going to blame the scientists for us getting all this wrong,
There we go.
And we know that, amongst the science, there is no such thing as the science. There are lots of scientists, and you can have a kind of general consensus in terms of certain aspects of this, but there's also serious disagreements on the basis of, sound arguments and good reasons for debate. And that's the nature of science. Now, how we get around that in terms of science communication is a huge challenge. I mean, what we need to have is a situation where we can at least put forward, in a way that people can trust, those aspects of the situation that we do have reasonable confidence about on the basis of good empirical evidence. But I think we also need to find a way of being able to say there are some things that we don't know, without that leading people to panic and to turn to alternative sources.
And I'm guessing it doesn't really help with alternative sources when you have people like Prince Charles advocating for homeopathy during these times. You've got Donald Trump advocating for anything under the sun. You've got like in India, I mean, the homeopathy is an actual part of government in India, for example. So,
oh God, yeah. I mean, it's
history for it actually. So again, those are the few that I know. But then one can't then look at science and go, well, we need to look at what the science is saying, and then go, well, actually, you know what? Just as it's like Pascal's argument, isn't it? This is what we're saying on this side, but just to be sure, just give it a go and see how you find it. It doesn't really work.
No, it is incredibly, it is a real challenge. There are people actively kind of working on these issues now and trying to find out what are the most effective ways of communicating science in this kind of context, and also of kind of debunking conspiracy theories. I mean, there's a kind of, some people think, well, what's the harm with conspiracy theories? So does it really matter if your next door neighbor thinks the moon landings were faked? Well, in and of itself, no, it doesn't really matter at all. But what we do know is that if you believe in conspiracy theory X, you are also likely to believe in conspiracy theory Y, even if it's totally logically unrelated. And so that can lead to a situation where, if you believe that, there was a conspiracy behind the assassination of JFK, you're also more likely to be an anti-vaxxer. And we know that those kind of health-related conspiracy theories do cost lives. It's been estimated that about 330,000 people died in South Africa because of that government's refusal to accept, they were basically HIV/AIDS denialists, and wouldn't let people take appropriate forms of treatment. And it's probably cost 330,000 people their lives. So, these beliefs are not harmless. They're just not.
So what do we do? I think that's the real kind of question.
If I if I could give you a straight answer to that, then I'd be a rich man.
You would.
I think we need.
And then I'd claim it because I did the conversation with you. So I'd claim a pituitary kind of income from that.
No, we need to obviously keep on tackling. I mean, there are some kind of fairly obvious basic things that we need to do. We need to find better ways of teaching people how to think critically. It's not about kind of telling people what to think. It's more about giving them the tools so that they can kind of evaluate evidence properly, so that they can ask appropriate questions about what's the source of this information. Is there something in it for the person who's putting out this message? I mean, you can see again with a lot of Trump's messages, they're totally in terms of self-interest and in terms of hoping that he'll get in again at the next election. We can get people to try and avoid some of the kind of pitfalls, particularly in health-related areas. One of the most kind of prevalent errors that drives belief in unfounded medical claims, complementary and alternative medicine, is, oh, I tried this and I got better, therefore this caused me to get better. Without, I assume it's obvious because you've got scientific training, but you may well have got better anyway. Unless you've got a good control sample, you can't know. And so many other factors that come into play, and you can get some of this stuff across with education, but I mean, most people, if we're honest, don't have the kind of inclination to kind of sit down and don't have the time. Most people are kind of much more pressed in their everyday lives to be able to sit down and properly evaluate the evidence and so on. We need to. Sorry, go on.
Precisely, like a lot of people haven't got that the beauty of time to be able to do so. So then we just need to so therefore we need to be better at being able to provide that information in a nutshell at the get-go.
Yeah. By and large, I mean, people do have, although we're talking about keeping people not trusting science and so on, if you compare the level of trust in science to the level of trust in politicians, and maybe estate agents, it's kind of, scientists do actually come out quite well, but there is a strong kind of anti-science movement as well. There are people who buy into the kind of new age pseudo-scientific ideas, hook, line and sinker, totally, and again, a lot of that will involve conspiratorial type thinking. And one of the problems in trying to kind of debunk conspiracies is that by their very nature, they are non-falsifiable. The idea that any kind of evidence that appears to count against the conspiracy was put there by the conspirators. So you can just ignore it. You don't have to take it into account.
It gets more dangerous though when you have people such as, I've seen quite a lot of religious pastors basically providing cures for COVID, providing this for COVID and that for COVID, and being able to, cure their population of people that support them. Again, that borders into the concerning and the somewhat dangerous, right? And why?
I mean, there are all kinds of different motivations in those kind of situations. I mean, clearly, some of these pastors and religious leaders, they actually genuinely believe what they're saying. All these, in the States, the fact that in some states, religious institutions didn't have to obey the social distancing rules. And clearly the kind of pastors in those for those congregations would have the general attitude of God will protect us. And they no doubt sincerely believe it because they're in there with all their there are others. I mean, even though I think they're, frankly, stupid to take that attitude, at least they're kind of sincere. They're not, whereas the kind of ones that are more kind of morally abhorrent are the ones who are deliberately exploiting this situation to make money, where they're kind of selling their cures. And again, a lot of the Christian fundamentalists, the TV evangelists and so on. They believe what they're saying for 1 minute. They are purely in it for the money, You look at the Peter Popoffs of this world and, oh my God, they are scum.
True. And I think a number of, I think nearly all religious institutions in the UK have closed down for now, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've generally been quite sensible about it. I think there've been one or two cases I've heard of you know, people in this country of religious leaders behaving in ways that we wouldn't approve of, but by and large that doesn't happen.
No.
We're not such a religiously polarized nation as the States, obviously.
No, exactly. And just to tie up, so in relation to let's say there's somebody watching this that might hold on to views that would be labeled as conspiracy theories or superstitions and things like that. And maybe they found this video because they're like, oh, maybe I want to know more about where I'm at, perhaps. What would be the last thing you would perhaps say?
I would say, again, it's difficult. It depends how far down the rabbit hole they are. But if they're still kind of rescuable, there are some good resources out there. There's a colleague of mine at Bristol, a guy called Stefan Lewandowski, who is a co-author of a downloadable publication called, I think it's called the Conspiracy Handbook. And that basically it's only very brief, about 12 pages long. It talks about the psychology of conspiracy and about ways of trying to kind of improve science communication and so on. But it kind of gives guidelines on the kind of questions you should ask when you come across these claims in terms of trying to evaluate how likely it is that they're true. So that would be a good thing to go and check out. And I suppose, I mean, skeptics are often accused of not being open-minded. You know, you're not open-minded. You're not prepared to look at my claims that the world is being run by shape-shifting lizards or whatever else it might be.
The YouTube videos that I have to my disposal.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you know, if your idea of doing research is watching YouTube videos, well, no, that's not research. I'm sorry, it's not. But
this isn't research. This is just putting a perspective out there. Just putting it out there.
Well, this is it. We're just asking questions. That's the other thing. We're just asking questions.
We're being skeptical, right?
But I mean, one important question to ask yourself is, and this goes for everybody, is, you know, what evidence would convince me I'm wrong? And if when you've thought about that, you realise that there's no kind of evidence that could ever convince you that you're wrong, well, that's a worry. You know, you've clearly just got a closed mental system. I can tell you some of the kinds of evidence that would convince me that some of these conspiracies might be true. Some conspiracies indeed do turn out to be true. But, you know, and I can also tell you what would convince me that some form of complementary alternative medicine really did work, and whether telepathy really does exist, whether aliens really are abducted, you know, all that. I can tell you the evidence that would convince me of that. Yeah. I'm open to being convinced by the evidence. But if you've got a situation where, well, there's nothing that could ever happen that would make me change my mind, well, that's it. There's no point talking to you, is there?
No. And I mean, I'm guessing, just as an added point, I think telephone telepathy is still in its infancy as far as gender is concerned, but that's another topic for another day. Chris French, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great day. Everybody else, thank you so much. Please stay safe and hope to see you soon. Thank you. I'd like to just take this moment to thank Professor Chris French from Goldsmiths University for talking to us today about superstitions and conspiracy theories relating to COVID-19. But if you wanted to get more involved, if you wanted to kind of learn more about our work, then please don't hesitate to have a look at, you know, you can search for Faith to Faithless on social media sites such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can also visit our website as well. If you would like to donate to the organisation, please see the donation link below, and we thank you very much. Once again, thank you very much for listening. I hope this conversation starts more conversations across the country and more, and I'm sure we'll deliver with more coming soon. Thank you very much. Take care. See you soon.